Welcome to Praxis Behind the Obscure podcast. And today I have a very special guest. I have Reverend Zemmi on, who is an author and has a really cool book that I actually saw on the Foolish Fish YouTube channel. Just looks absolutely amazing, and figured it'd be a good chance to have you on today. And you also are the founder of the Church of Flesh Together, which I'm a member of on Facebook as well. So can you introduce yourself to the audience and give us sort of a brief explanation on how you got interested in the esoteric and the occult in general?
Sure. My name is Zemmi Tehuti, and I guess this path for me started in childhood. I was surrounded by people who insisted I be religious, though they themselves weren't practicing any sort of a religion. So I always had this guilt for not acknowledging any God. I always felt like I wanted to, but I didn't know how. And I basically started to explore the esoteric world a little bit, and I was drawn to it, and it led me to the PGM, or the Greek Magical Papyri. In that, there are countless gods and spirits, all of whom I explored relationships with, almost none of which seemed to fit until I found Hecate. Though I was drawn to her, I couldn't relate to her. There was still some sort of a barrier between her and I. And one day I was reading a book about her ancient religious following, and I had what I can only describe as being a profound epiphany. I do feel that I was led to devotion of Thoth through my exploration of Hecate. And when I found Thoth, everything just kind of fell into place. I figured out how to believe in God. I figured out how to kind of control my own fate. I started rebuilding my whole entire life. For 15 years, half of my life, I've wanted to be an author. Through my devotion to Thoth, I have found incredible publishing opportunities. I have found opportunities to speak all over the country to people all over the world, and I've just been able to explore my passions. So I feel like I have found my calling. I feel like, to thank the power that I call Thoth, that led me to this, I was to establish something to venerate him. So I built a shrine in my house. That sort of grew. I started performing rituals and devotional services in person, just kind of around the country. COVID kind of shut all that down, so I went online, and as soon as I got online, everything just kind of started blowing up. So.
Okay, cool. So you got interested through basically the Greek Magical Papyri, and actually I saw you on Jack Grail's channel. So were you also in contact with him, or did you go through his course? Because I'm currently taking that right now. So was that sort of one of your gateways into working with Thoth as well?
Yeah, kind of. Which class are you taking of his? The Hecate one, or the 50 Rites for 50 Nights PGM class?
The PGM class.
It's kind of psychedelic. So Jack Grail, who of course published the Hecateon, Samuel David, who is about to publish a book with Anathema about Sumerian devotional practices in the modern world, and myself, all live in the same town, which is exceptionally rare. Yeah, and we all just sort of found each other, and so Jack's Hecate class, sort of an early um, what's the word? Sort of an early version of Jack's Hecate class. We actually just kind of experienced in his basement. So we all sort of inspired each other and pushed each other, and now we're all coming up together. It's really cool. It's a lot of fun. It's a very rewarding experience. So Jack is kind of like, oh, sorry.
Oh, what city are you guys in, by the way?
Oh, we're just out. We're about 4 hours outside of Chicago. Nobody's ever heard of the city we live in, so we just kind of leave it at a few hours outside of Chicago.
Okay, that sounds cool. It just sounds like a big synchronicity, right, in a way. And there's some guerrilla occultists out in some area outside of Chicago, and you guys are making big waves across the occult community. So it's pretty cool to see. Definitely cool to see.
It's exceptionally rare that people in this community find each other in the real world. We're starting to notice, and it's even more rare that people as devoted as we are find each other in the real world. So yeah, it really does kind of seem like fate brought us together.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, cool. So what are your current practices, and what practices do you do regularly, and why do you do them? And I'm curious how your overall practices and devotions have developed over time.
Well, as I started to research further into the cultic following of Thoth and various Egyptian gods, I kind of started to realize that every cosmology was sort of unique to that specific group. They all served different functions, and it would only make sense the modern world, the modern United States, would need its own. So I've sort of started what I refer to as the modern mystery tradition of Thoth. So we have our own cosmology that describes the establishing of creation, everything. And then my daily practice is I wake up and I sit in shrine at 5 a.m. and pray, give offerings, and then again at noon, and once more at midnight. I acknowledge most lunar holidays. And then, I'm sorry, what's that?
Oh, actually, now that you mention it, you mentioned that you acknowledge lunar holidays. That was actually one thing I was curious about. And as far as like the Egyptian, like in general, Egyptian magic and the Egyptian practices, I believe they had their own kind of unique calendar too, right? Was that a lunar calendar, or what? I really don't know much about it, but maybe if you knew something about it, that'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah, well, the Egyptians had a few calendars, and it just kind of depended where and when you were, which one you used. And that extends all the way up to Coptic Christianity in Egypt. The Coptic Church has their own version of the ancient Egyptian calendars. I personally, just because, it's 2021, my kind of day-to-day life, I use just the, Gregorian calendar with which everyone's familiar. But then for my spiritual practice, I have developed a modified Coptic calendar, which I'm actually going to be publishing sometime in the next couple of months with Thayan Publishing, the people
Awesome.
who just published the Book of Flesh and Feather. We're going to be publishing the Litanies of Thoth, which is that modified calendar, a number of holidays. I was born into a family with no traditions of any sort. In fact, up until 2 years ago, I wasn't even able to track my family's lineage beyond my grandparents. So I had to kind of develop everything myself, especially when the baby came. So, I had to have something into which she could be born. So, yeah, I've got all my own holidays, all of our own saints, and then as well as 365 prayers, which I wrote over the course of 3 days in a manic whirlwind of spiritual ecstasy.
That
So
sounds pretty
that's
awesome.
going to be exciting. Yeah.
Okay,
I am
cool.
very
This
fortunate to have found a fan.
Yeah, it's awesome. This calendar, this is going to be like a did you mention it's like a little book, or it's sort of what format will this be in?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm very fortunate to have found Thayan because they seem to understand exactly my image. If not understand it, they're capable of one-upping what's in my mind. So I'm hoping that this book will be printed in sort of. Are you familiar with the Gideons who leave Bibles and psalm books everywhere?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. In the
Uh,
like the Motel Sixes all across the country, right? Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah. I'm hoping to have it sort of produced about the size of their psalm books so you could just fit it in your pocket. But there are some logistical considerations that I don't have yet. So we'll see. But either way, it's going to be uh, a very exciting book to have. And it'll be substantially smaller than the Book of Flesh and Feather at any rate.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it looks like quite a big book, and it's very rare that I see. Foolish Fish reviews a lot of books, and I also, I have a fair amount of occult books here myself, but it's very rare that I see a book and I'm sort of blown away by the overall presentation and quality, and the overall setup of the book, I guess you would say, or the way it's laid out. And yeah, it looks like they did. You, of course, along with the publisher, just did an incredible job with this. So um, I'm happy to spread the word about it, and definitely look forward to grabbing it myself as well. Um, so yeah, I noticed also just from watching some of your videos and heard you on a couple podcasts that you seem to be very open-minded. You do have your own specific practice and your own specific church that you founded, and you're developing as you go along. But you also seem to be at the same time not dogmatic, or very open-minded, very eclectic in your approach. Why do you think that that's an important thing?
Well, like I said, growing up, I was just sort of surrounded by people who tried to shove God down my throat, but didn't actually show me how to accept or believe in God. So I was just sort of getting beaten over the head by religious devotion that I just couldn't figure out. I spent a lot of time exploring various religions across the world, and I've even had the privilege of experiencing a number of them firsthand. And I just kind of started to realize the things that separate these religions are entirely human. And if you look at some of these religions from the perspective of a practitioner, you'll find that to be true. There are a number of religions that claim that their various gods are just emanating from one, sort of unified power. And I sort of feel that that is probably the best way to approach God. It doesn't matter what name you assign God, so long as your devotion lies in something bigger and outside of yourself, it is valid. So while I personally call the God in the shrine in my house Thoth, you could just as easily look at that baboon and call that God, Ganesha, or whatever. So I wanted this temple to be sort of the resource I did not have growing up. Growing up, I wanted to believe in God, like I said, but just nobody could show me how. Nobody could convince me. Nobody could give me resources. So this God represents whatever God you need it to, basically. We call him Thoth, but again, it could be anything. So um, I'm hoping to provide community for people to explore their own religious devotions. And you don't even have to come to us believing in God. You don't have to leave us believing in God. We're just here for you if you need us. And then in the meantime, I mean, we're basically a fully functional temple. We,
Mhm.
I mean, I officiate weddings. I can
Oh,
perform
wow.
funeral services. I provide a number of different divination services, um, amulets, phylacteries, incenses, natron. I mean, we're a fully functional temple. Eventually, we would like to get a physical brick and mortar space, so we can also include a sleep temple, or a slightly more developed sleep temple. We do have sleep temple services. In ancient Egypt, a sleep temple would basically be where a person would go. It's sort of a designated area in a temple complex that a person would go and be led into trance to receive visions. A priest would then interpret those visions. Um,
Mm.
I basically I started a similar service. I hold on
It's
a
kind of like
second. I
a
got this
like a
silly cat.
oh, mhm. Oh, it's okay. Like sort of like a chamber of initiation, right?
No, not exactly, because
Okay.
the sleep temple's open to anyone. You don't have to practice
Okay.
with us or anything. But
Mhm.
I record these vowel intonations, which, well, again, if anyone's ever flipped through the Greek magical papyri, I'm sure you've seen all of these long strings of vowels, and even more so in various Coptic texts. I basically just kind of interpreted those to be songs or chants. So I chant, and then I upload them up to Spotify, the Sleep
Mhm.
Temple of Tehuti. And so, you can listen to those as you're drifting off to sleep. If you receive a dream, you can get a hold of me, and I can either use ancient Egyptian dream divination or just interpret the dream depending on what you want.
Mm.
But again, if we have a physical brick and mortar space, we can actually put a couple of cots in there and do it in person, and it'd be pretty psychedelic. But then we could also maintain, various shrines to whichever gods find their way into our space. So that's the kind of the goal in the long run. We'll see how that works out.
That sounds awesome. You mentioned this is on Spotify. You have some of these recordings on Spotify.
Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of
Okay.
funny. They all last about an hour, and I don't have a whole lot of instruments anymore. I've got a steel tongue drum and a bell.
Mhm.
So my wife and I and our baby live in an apartment right now, so I can't imagine what the people living above and below us must think I'm doing. Uh, but I enjoy them quite a bit.
Okay, awesome. Sounds great. You did mention to kind of backtrack a little bit. You did mention that God may have 1,000 faces, and um, it's sort of whatever appeals to you and whatever sort of resonates with you. But I think Thoth, in particular, Tehuti, is a face of God, if you would call it that, that really resonates with quite a lot of people and has, quite a presence, right? Like, do you, why do you think that, if you look at, well, Western Hermeticism and, all throughout the ancient world and a lot of occult practices and what have you, I mean, Thoth is one of the major figures, right? If not one of the most major of all figures. Why do you think that Thoth, in general, or Tehuti in general, has so much appeal?
Well, there are there are dozens of epithets assigned to Jehuti. But if you look at a lot of them can be applied to any god. Most of them have been applied to multiple gods. The ones that are unique to Tehuti are ones that associate him with the written and spoken word, with arts, with scribes, so specifically communication and knowledge. I think he kind of found his way into the occult and esoteric community through his associations with knowledge. He is, as the god of knowledge, he is the seeking out of hidden information. He is the reception of that information. And then likewise, as the god of communication, he is the one that we find when we actually, he's the one we approach when we actually find these sources, when we find a community in which we can talk about all of these crazy books and all of this secret knowledge. Again, that is an epiphany of him.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, I don't know. I think it's just kind of natural, I guess, that he would find his way. Not only that, but he's got all of these associations with foreigners. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he's referred to as the god of foreign lands, as well as he who distinguishes the tongues of every lands. So not only, does he have those other associations, but he's also kind of got this this tendency to kind of drift all over the world. He's not specific to one location, which is why he found his way into the ancient Hellenic religions, into the Roman world. That's why his name continues into the Coptic Church, which is Christianity. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, you find them all over, So there's an interesting book that I haven't read that I'll have to get around reading. I'm not sure if you heard of it. It's called, or probably you have. I think it's called the Egyptian Hermes. Have you heard of this book?
Oh, is that by Boylan?
I think so. I can't remember offhand, but I have a friend that really recommended it. Looks quite interesting, but sort of how sort of how Thoth evolved, and not necessarily evolved, but sort of made appearances through, like you mentioned, the Hellenic world. And I can't really fully comment on it because I haven't read it, but it sounds like a very interesting one.
The Hermes of Egypt, a study of some aspects of theological thought in ancient Egypt. That's actually the source at Oxford University Press. That book actually has a huge list of epithets which include where they were mentioned, which is an incredible resource to have.
Okay, awesome. Speaking of books, your current book, I'm curious, what was the overall inspiration behind it, and what sort of practices are in it? Who would you say overall too is the target audience for your book, and what is sort of included in it? I mean, you don't need to go in, obviously you get the book and you find what's included, but just kind of I'm curious of an overall who would you say it's aimed for, and what are the the general practices or contents in it?
Well, as I developed my religious beliefs in regards to devotion to Thoth, I kind of started to realize the ancient Egyptians had no separation between religion, science, art, and magic. Nowadays, people refer to ancient Egyptian magic as Heka, but that is shamefully oversimplified. Heka is, it's the sciences, it's art, it's kind of almost everything we use to communicate what we understand to be true. There is no separation. So as I started to deepen my devotion to Thoth, I started to understand certain principles to be true, certain principles to be guiding my life and my devotion to him. So as my spiritual beliefs began to unfold, as did the Heka that opened them up. So it's actually kind of weird. The books that I am publishing, while I am very fortunate that they are finding a bigger and bigger audience, I'm kind of really only publishing them for myself and to be offerings to Tehuti. As I find certain things to be true, I will write it in a book and it will get published. So again, I'm very happy that people are finding the information useful. But to be totally honest with you, the books are being published for my own use. That being said, though, they are occult in nature, so the information isn't going to be completely open. I mean, you do have to form a relationship with the work and kind of let it open itself up to you. So the target audience, I mean, I don't know. There's not really a target audience, but it could be anybody who finds it useful in their life. The Book of Flesh and Feather was basically written to be sort of like an act of deconstruction. It is sort of works to pick apart my life and everything I thought to be true and everything I worked really hard to try to convince myself was true, and then reestablish it in a way that I find now to be true. When I found Tehuti, when I had that epiphany of him by a pond in rural Missouri, he came as a glossy ibis clutching a snake in his beak. It was very dramatic, but a beautiful experience. I was in the middle of a nervous breakdown, basically. So he came in chaos. So the first step in this, magical praxis that I'm developing is dissolve into chaos, remove all meaning from everything, and allow all of existence to flow around you in fractured little pieces so that you can collect them and rebuild them in a way that makes sense to you. So this book was written with that principle in mind, that everything you know to be true is to be taken apart and rebuilt. So because that is true, there are a lot of disjointed sentences. I utilize the whole entire page to sort of tell this story, with the hopes that it will inspire movement. The words kind of flow across the page and down the page. So as you read it, at the very least, your head starts to move back and forth. You kind of start to rock at the waist a little bit. There's a certain element of ecstasy that seems to get lost most of the time now to people practicing ancient religions now. One of those is this idea of, building yourself into this fury where your whole entire body is in this experience. So, and that is what I'm kind of trying to build up in this.
Yeah, awesome. It looks like, from what I've seen on the YouTube video by Foolish Fish, it looks like it's definitely like an experience in itself. It's not like a book that you just pick up and read like a normal book in that regard, but it's a whole sensory, and it looks like it uses a lot of different approaches to get you out of maybe like your linear mind in a way, right? Like there's all kinds of, like you said, the way the sentences and different symbols are laid out on the page. It isn't like a normal left to right, what would you say? It's not like measured out in a normal way. It's like it definitely gets you maybe into like a chaotic state, or sort of out of perhaps your normal linear thought process. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
I wrote the book with a rhythm in mind, if that makes any sense. So the text has a certain rhythmic quality. So not only does your body kind of start to move as you read the words,
Mhm.
but you kind of find yourself, your body sort of syncing up subconsciously to the words as well. So,
Mhm.
I mean, once you get in it, take the book wherever you want. I mean, continue certain sentences, certain ideas, make it whatever you need it to be once you figure out how to connect with it. You know what I mean?
Sure, sure, sure. I like that because I have a couple friends that are a part of this writing movement called neo decadence, and they write books very much in a way that sort of like how your book appears. That it's just not conventional in the way that it takes you on an experience. It's not just a normal, I mean, there are a lot of occult books coming out, right, and that can be sort of formulaic or very similar in many ways, right? Whereas like it's sort of a this looks sort of very, very innovative and very experiential, and it's not necessarily just like the same old, it's not like another romantic novel or same old occult book in a way, but it's really meant to um, sort of bring the reader along, on this journey, right? That's what it really looks like. And so I mean, it's not often that I'm like extremely impressed by videos of cult books, but definitely yours caught my eye quite a bit. So, um, yeah, very
Yeah,
very
I can't
interesting.
believe
Look,
that foolish fish. I can't
hmm
believe that foolish fish review. That was totally mind blowing.
hmm
Uh, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think
I can't believe that my
yeah.
words are being treated with such reverence. It's a
hmm
deeply humbling experience.
Oh yeah, and I think he probably has the biggest like YouTube channel on occult book reviews, and so I'm sure
Yeah,
that
like over
video alone is gonna.
46,000. Yeah,
Oh
I would
geez,
certainly
yeah.
think so.
Yeah, that's gonna really spread the word for sure, after
Yeah.
after he published that. So yeah, that's definitely a good thing. Okay. I know that you have your own community. I saw it on Facebook. I joined the Facebook group, which is called the Church of Flesh and Feather, and I noticed you do some live streams, some weekly live streams, right? And so, what are how can people find this, and what sort of what's included in the community? Like this is, as you mentioned, because we have COVID-19, you do have this Facebook community and these streams that you do. But I'm curious a little bit about like what stuff you include in the streams, and then also are there like separate in-person events that are happening, or do you have plans for those after?
Um, well, I mean, I started doing all this stuff in person, and I never thought to put it online until COVID happened, and I kind of got shut up inside of my apartment, so I went to online. So once the world opens back up, I mean, I'll definitely go back out and start doing it. There's something deeply rewarding about experiencing all of this stuff with a group of people, a bunch of like-minded people where you can kind of relax and open up and allow yourself to be comfortable uh, being religiously devoted. Uh,
Mhm.
this community also helps to sort of, soften that blow. You'd be surprised how many people seem uncomfortable with the idea of devoting themselves to a god or even acknowledging gods, especially in the occult community. I mean, we all talk so much about spirits and gods, but we don't devote ourselves to them. We just sort of, you know, utilize their gifts, but we don't really do that much in our day-to-day life to thank them. So this kind of helps people become a little more comfortable with the idea.
Sure, that's a good point. Yeah, it's sort of like a bhakti yoga approach, a devotional. Like in the East, this is quite common with like in Hinduism and Eastern religions, that they're a lot of devotional practices, right? And so,
Yeah,
yeah, that's a point. Sort of in Western practice, there seems to be, um, I don't know what you would say, maybe a void or a hole that a lot of people think more along the lines of what can I get rather than sort of surrendering over to um, a deity or whatnot, right?
definitely. I don't know if this is controversial or not to say, but from my own observations, the impression I get is that most people, well, at least in the United States,
Mhm.
don't seem to be devoting themselves to a god, but rather their own image in a divine context. So they're sort of worshiping their own image, they're worshiping their own pride, and then, yeah, only acknowledging uh, God when, well, usually only when bad things happen. Everybody's so quick to say, oh, why God? Why have you done this? But people are reluctant to thank God for the things they've been given. And that's, certainly
Mhm.
not the case for everybody, but it seems like a growing population of people no longer actually fears their gods.
Sure, yeah, that's a good point. I think that perhaps a reason for that, maybe in the Western context, is due to, maybe the dogmatic approach to a degree of Christianity, where Christianity itself is also a very devotional path, right? Like the love for Jesus and whatnot. But I think a lot of people, maybe at least Westerners, where they maybe they fear that, or they're maybe apprehensive or whatnot, would be perhaps because I think they're afraid of giving away maybe their, you know, maybe buying into an ideology too much, or you know, it's sort of the fear of giving away your mind, I guess you would say, right? Whereas what's really cool about your approach is it is that bhakti yoga, it is that devotional approach, it is that surrender, but you're not you're not pushing a dogma. You're not saying you have to believe in everything I say. So it's sort of the devotion and surrender devoid of dogma. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah, while this religion is definitely based in ancient Egyptian culture, I mean, I have developed it into its own unique thing, the way they did in Hermopolis, Heliopolis, So this is our own kind of little branch of that religious devotion. So, that being said, we don't have a list of religious laws and codes um, because, well, I personally believe anyway that morality, sense of right and wrong, are human. So you don't need a god to tell you what those things are, So we don't have that religious code. We do have 9 principles, but that's kind of more on the occult side of what I'm doing. Um, they're not laws by which to live your life, but sort of these ideas to consider when you are trying to change things in your life.
Hmm.
So, yeah, so you're free to believe whatever you want.
Okay,
I
that's
think a
great.
lot of people nowadays, and this is a very multifaceted conversation, but I think a lot of people in the West are sort of used to buying their own beliefs back
Mm-hmm.
from these established groups, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
And so a lot of people are just still at the moment unable to just release themselves entirely to religious devotion, because if they did that, all of the hierarchy separating them from the divine would be unnecessary. So I think what I'm doing, what the Church of Flesh and Feathers is doing, is just one small part of a much larger religious reawakening. And
Hmm.
it's very exciting to see. I know I'm not the only person doing what I'm doing. And
Hmm.
I mean, I hope one day to establish other shrines, in other parts of the world and other parts of the country. So
Yeah,
it's a very rewarding thing to watch happen.
yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing the overall growth, and also, obviously we have COVID-19, but perhaps, once this sort of calms down, probably the spread of more physical temples and whatnot, right? And to go back on your point about, people. especially Westerners, right? Like not wanting to give in to something. I think that because I've been living in Asia for roughly 10 years, and it's interesting seeing the cultural differences, right? Because in America, it's definitely more of an individualistic society, whereas in Asia, it's more of a group society. So you see less apprehension towards perhaps giving yourself into something, whether that be a god or Buddha or societal, society. Um, like here, for example, even this is kind of off topic, but here it's like everyone would wear a mask because it's to protect everyone else, right? Whereas every time I see things online in America, it's like it's my right. Like it's a totally different way of seeing reality in a way. One is very, very much focused on the individual, and then the other is more, perhaps focused on a group or some other common good, right? And so,
Well, yeah. I mean, the West is definitely very splintered apart right now.
mhm,
Um, well, actually, that sort of alludes to one of the nine principles, one of the nine naturist principles that I mentioned, which is basically um, like the only way to really limit yourself is to admit something. So to assign a name or a label is to unassign other names and other labels.
mhm.
So without assigning any of those limitations, you're kind of free to be one with everything. But the more labels you apply to yourself, the more disconnected you become. America, at least, it's a fiercely individualized country, especially right now. Everybody is sitting behind their computers, defining themselves on Facebook, when in reality, who you say you are on the internet is usually very different than who you are in real life.
Oh, sure. Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely an issue, right? And it is definitely easy to fall into being extremely polarized if there are no consequences for your communication, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to be a to put it frank, it's a lot easier to be a dick, right? Online than face to face, right? Because there's no
Yeah, and
real
it seems like it's kind of more
consequences.
appealing to most people these days. If you look at like William Blake, he created this mythos of Albion, right? Veda
Mhm.
Lindsay created Butterfly Town. It is defining their cultures by the best of themselves, and the
Mhm.
West, specifically the United States, seems to define itself by the worst of its qualities. So with that in mind, I mean, it seems like people are just kind of competing uh, to who can portray the world in a darker light. And while there certainly are dark elements to this world, I think people forget the power, their true power of language. I mean, we live in a world where the spoken word is a first degree weapon now. You think about that
Mhm.
teenager who was charged with first degree murder, by talking her boyfriend into suicide. Words really
Mhm.
do have power, so the more
Mhm.
we focus on and the more we almost revere the darker elements, the more power it's given. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say or not. If it is, remove it. But
Mhm.
um, I don't know. It might be
Well,
a
yeah.
self-righteous little tirade I'm getting on.
No, I think you make a good point, and I think that for many people when they go throughout their day, the center of their focus is obviously or most likely themselves, right? You're thinking, how do I feel? Am I hungry? What do I want? And so I think that you offering this sort of devotion, this, especially since people can't always meet in person these days, even to attend one of your Facebook events, right? On the Church of Flesh and Feather, and to whether it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, to spend some portion of your day perhaps um, getting outside of that paradigm of yourself and sort of surrendering or focusing on a higher, anything pretty much outside of yourself, but sort of allowing yourself to be enraptured or to be in awe and respecting something greater than yourself. I think that time is very important, and that even if it's a short time every day or weekly, I think that can really carry over into your mindset and your actions and your behaviors in your day-to-day, mundane life, right? I think that alone could really change how people see each other and interact with each other.
Yeah, I certainly hope so.
It's okay. I'm very curious about Thoth. I heard that you said in another podcast, I heard you mention there's like various forms of Thoth, right? Like a lot of us are curious with like the ibis head portrayal of him, but you also mentioned there's like a baboon version. There's several different manifestations, right? Like what are a few perhaps of the common representations? And I heard you mention something about he also he also provides himself a high colonic or an enema from time to time or something like that. I'm curious about what's the story behind that. That's pretty entertaining to say the least, right? Yeah.
Well, Tehuti has certain medicinal qualities and associations. If you think about, well, we still use some of the terminology. I mean, like a hermetically sealed container, hermetically Hermes, that all, it's theorized, kind of started when ancient Egyptians observed ibises, basically sucking water up into their beak, shoving their beak up their butt between their legs, and giving themselves an enema. A lot of birds swallow tiny pebbles to kind of grind up the food inside of their stomachs, or they have very powerful gizzards. Ibises have neither, so they get blocked up from time to time. But yeah, the most kind of acknowledged forms of Tehuti, who is, a god, a non-physical being, are an ibis-headed man and a baboon. But that being said, scribes also acknowledged Tehuti as being their writing utensils, so their reeds, their ink. I think I have found a hymn referring to him as incense smoke. So with that in mind, if you kind of think of, the whole idea that God is all, God is one, God is all, I personally try to figure out new ways to refer to God, to help myself and others observe him there. So yeah, I refer to him as the god of intoxicating smoke. That's one of the epithets. The Lord of the Middle West, which, I mean, that's where I found him, in the American Midwest. Yeah, I don't know. I've got dozens. I'm going to be going over some of them in the class, and then the Litanies of Thoth is going to be, well, it's going to have many, many of them. One of my personal favorites is the all colors Father who comes on waves of sound. So at that point, cool. I know it's kind of psychedelic, right? Tehuti
it's like a psychedelic surfer.
Yeah, Tehuti is associated in antiquity with, color pigments, art. So that being said, one way to honor him is to create for him. So what more fitting way of doing that than coming up with all these, really far out names to refer to him by.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I did see, as I mentioned, I am taking Jack Grail's course at Blackthorn, and I saw that you have an upcoming course coming out. Is it next month? Is that right?
Oh yeah, March 8th. It's called Speak Thoth ancient Egyptian magic in a modern world.
Oh, awesome. Okay. What does that I did kind of browse through it, but maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about what the course includes, what it entails, and what are there any like prerequisites for it? What can people expect if they take it?
Well, there are no prerequisites, and people keep asking if it's going to cover my book, and it will not. I can't really guarantee everyone's going to have my book, but not only that, like, believe me, I know occult books are spendy, and I wouldn't want to limit the experience that much, because you're already paying for this class. Why would I make you pay more for my book? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But the class is going to kind of look at, it's going to look at ways to continue the ancient practices into our modern world. Kind of the best, most dramatic example of this is ancient Egyptians used two different kinds of wands. The Oriental Institute in Chicago has a number of they're referred to as apotropaic wands. So they're made out of hippopotamus ivory, and they kind of look like boomerangs, and they're engraved with various demons and gods. But they were used just to sort of cleanse your space. Now, with that in mind, they were using hippopotamus ivory to cleanse their space. Well, in central Illinois, we don't have hippopotami, and if we did, we certainly wouldn't be chasing them around to kill them for their ivory. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
it might actually be illegal as well.
Well,
so.
Believe me, man, out where I am sure there are plenty of people who would charge at a hippopotamus to hunt it down, but I'm not one of those people.
Right.
But we do have certain animals here that share a lot of qualities with hippopotami that people probably wouldn't even think to associate the two. So, what is a hippopotamus but a large animal that looks cute from far away, but up close is actually kind of unpredictable and dangerous, right? Well, we've got cows. Most people don't realize how violent cows can be. They'll charge you, and they won't run around you. They'll just kind of plow right through you. My wife's grandfather was actually kicked by it. He's raises cows, and he was kicked by one and broke a number of his ribs. They're unpredictable and dangerous. So that being said, my wife and I were out in the woods one day, and we found a whole entire cow skeleton. Well, what is a piece of a cow that is long and curved like a worked piece of hippopotamus ivory? Cow rib. So I picked up one of those ribs and I engraved it. So my apotropaic wand is a large cow rib. So, there are ways of doing things from antiquity today that maybe people just don't realize. We're going to look at amulets, what their functions were, and how to sort of customize them to today. We're going to look at the concept of a sleep temple. People are fascinated by their dreams and as well as their subconscious, and they probably don't even realize how incredible of a tool your subconscious mind really is. So we're going to explore that. We're going to look at, like 3 different forms of divination, one of which I actually created myself with the concept of the Agdawad, or the Eightfold, in mind. Most people are kind of familiar with the Aeneid, or the Nine, which is the creation story wherein Atum creates the physical world. But there's actually an older creation myth where, depending on which one you look at, but for our purposes, we'll say Tehuti brought forth the Agdawad, which is the 8, and they established concepts like infinity, and vast, open, unobstructed space. So sort of the principles in which the world was allowed to be created, if that makes any sense. So I created this form of divination with that in mind to try to sort of give people the opportunity to commune with primordial time.
Okay. So it sounds very comprehensive. Like you cover divination and kind of your own practice of divination and amulets and sort of using ancient practices for the modern world. So yeah, it definitely sounds very comprehensive. It's a few months too, right? How long is the course? Does it run?
It's 13 weeks, and I
Mhm.
think it's going to be pretty comprehensive. To be totally honest with you, I am intensely socially awkward most of the time. I
Mhm.
mean, when I'm doing stuff of a religious nature, I sort of have this, priestly mindset that I fall into. But when I have to be candid on camera, I
Mhm.
am weird and awkward. So um,
Mhm.
I think it's going to be comprehensive, yet pretty casual at the same time, because I'm teaching this class with the hopes of continuing to build this community.
Mm.
So
Okay, cool. All right. Well, you have the Church of Flesh and Feather on Facebook that people can find, and also the Blackthorn School has links to your class called Speak Thoth. Is that right?
yep. And then
Okay,
there
cool.
is the Sleep Temple of Tehuti on
Mhm.
Spotify, um, which again support me freaking out my neighbors and go listen to the Sleep Temple recordings. But then we have a YouTube channel as well, which is it's the same stuff that's on the Facebook. Um, it's just not everybody has Facebook, So I'm
Mhm.
kind of trying to take over. Eventually, I'll have some kind of an online store, and I'm sure a website eventually. But to be completely honest with you, most of my tech know-how
Mhm.
um, is being developed almost specifically for uh, the Church of Flesh and Feather. See, I grew up uh, studying ancient languages and cultures. I kind of missed out on the computer stuff, so now I'm trying desperately to catch up. But I'm working on it.
Okay, as far as the Sleep Temple stuff too, you mentioned that's on Spotify. Are there any other? Is it on YouTube or Facebook as well, or is it only available via Spotify?
Well, it's kind of only on Spotify. Some of the stuff um, I'll go live on Facebook to record, and
Hmm.
then I'll upload it onto Spotify. So there
Hmm.
is something to experiencing this in front of an effigy of Thoth,
Hmm.
with the incense crackling and the flame kind of casting moving shadows across Jehuti's face. So I do upload some of the videos just for people who can't attend it live.
Hmm.
But the Sleep Temple stuff is supposed to sort of be a guided meditation, so most
Okay,
of it is
cool.
just on Spotify.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I'll include all the links to everything you mentioned, and really appreciate you coming on today, and really look forward to seeing the evolution of the Church of Flesh and Feather, and definitely appreciate what you're bringing to the community. So thanks a lot.
Well, right on, man. Thanks for having me.
Hmm. Definitely, and until next time.